everybody, welcome back to Sports Khabri. Sports journalism in India is still unfortunately one of those areas where we do not see a lot of women. The numbers have certainly improved over the years, but there's a lot of room for improvement still. Today we will be speaking with Manasi Pathak. Manasi is a very well-known face in the world of sports journalism in India. Manasi is also the perfect person to tell us how the industry actually looks like for women right now. So let's find out how the conversation goes. Hi, Mansi. Welcome to Sports Khabri. Thank you for giving us your time today.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be here.
Mansi, when did you realize or when did that dream come to you that you want to become a sports journalist?
So my background when I was in high school, which is known as junior college in Mumbai, where I studied, I was actually studying commerce. And at that time, I used to write sports blogs just for fun because I was interested in watching football. And these were mostly football related blogs. I used to write particularly about Manchester United since that is the club I like. So I used to do it as a hobby, and when I was about to just decide my career path after grade 12 for my undergraduation, my sister suggested that maybe I could give a shot at journalism or any sort of content creation or something more creative rather than studying further in commerce. So I was preparing to become a chartered accountant at that point. And we decided, okay, if I have to make any sort of change in the pathway, this is the right time to do it. So I decided that, okay, maybe since I have a good grip on English and I enjoy writing, I can give journalism a shot. So I took up my bachelor's in mass media with the aim in mind that I want to get into journalism. And I was lucky enough that that worked out eventually.
So you said that you used to work on your own blog and used to write about sports. So growing up, was there an environment at home or in school? Did you have friends who used to watch sports with you?
So, growing up, initially, I used to watch a lot of cricket because of my father. Like in any other South Asian household, there was cricket on our TV all the time. So, I was interested in sports because of it. And in school, I mean, there was a sort of environment where we would take part in activities in school, and also my friends were interested in sports. But it was somewhere around class 8 or class 6 that became interested in football because of my family. Like my one of my cousins, he used to follow it. So I was like, okay, like this is a good interest that maybe I can sort of merge my interest of sports and also my skill of writing. And that's how I decided that, okay, maybe sports journalism is something we could try.
So, wanting to become a journalist, studying journalism, and then getting a job in sports journalism, that in itself is a different journey. So, talk to us about that journey.
Right. So when I was doing my bachelor's in mass media, at that time I was doing a couple of internships. So I was first interning for a couple of months at DNA newspaper, which is no longer in print right now. At that time it was. So I was there working for their sports section. That's the sports page. It was pretty, I mean, in terms of an exposure, that was the first time I was actually getting to work hands-on in a professional environment. So that's how I did. And then later on, I was doing sort of an internship with Go.com, and later they took me on board as like a part-time creator of stuff. So I was doing my studies, and I was also covering matches on the weekends whenever I had time, going for press conferences. So that was like a hands-on experience I got. But I always wanted to study further in terms of doing like a proper master's or a post graduation. So then I studied post graduation in journalism. That was for about a year. And when I got my first job, it was through the college placements that we have. So at that time, I was very clear that I want to take up only a sports writing job. So I had signed up for Sports Star, where I worked earlier. They had come on campus for a recruitment, and that was the only test I signed up for. And luckily, that worked out. So they hired a few people from my college, and that was my first foray into getting into sports journalism.
And now that you are a sports journalist, people know you. What is a normal day in your life like? Because a lot of times we tend to ignore the time effort that goes into sports journalism. Days are very hectic. On important days, on weekends, you have to work. Important matches sometimes take place at odd hours. So how do you manage your entire day, and how do you manage, like time with family, with friends? How do you incorporate all of that into it?
So that's the most difficult part, I think, in terms of the work-life balance that comes in this field, because like you mentioned, most of the weekends are working since that's when most of the sporting action takes place. and I work different shifts, so my work timings keep changing. So if I want to give you an idea about how my day is, I worked the recent weekend that went by. So uh, I was working the morning shift, but right now there were the women's football World Cup qualifiers which are going on. So I had to keep an eye on that. So my day started at 6:30. There were two matches that were happening, so I covered those matches. And apart from that, majority of my work now at Reuters, where I'm a sports correspondent, it includes breaking news. So I keep an eye on any major breaking news that's expected, or any small sort of news, like say any injury updates from players or any match reports. That's the sort of work, but it's mostly around news is what I do right now.
Mansi, you've covered events, sports events in India. You've covered sports events internationally. What has your experience been like if you have to compare things in India and abroad? What are some of the things that we can learn? Some of the things that are good that happen in our country. So can you like talk to us about that experience?
So in terms of covering events in India, I've mostly covered like the league level events, and I have covered, so most of the events that I've covered in India were either in Chennai or in Mumbai. So it was either the ISL, I League, so mostly the leagues, and a few times whenever the Indian national team, the men's team, whenever they used to play. And abroad, I had covered the World Cup, which recently happened in Qatar. So I think drawing a comparison would only be fair if I'm comparing, say, the international events. So let's compare, say, India's match and any other international match that happened. I think in terms of the services and the kind of arrangements that you're doing for the media matters, in terms of first thing that you need is connectivity. So making sure there's good connectivity in terms of Wi-Fi or any sort of travel. You're trying to help them in any way possible. And other than that, the accessibility is what matters most, I guess. Like being given that accessibility to players, or even talking to any match officials, stuff like that. But the major difference in terms of hands-on experience I've seen is there are more women when I went abroad, and because it was also a big event like the World Cup, so the whole international media is going to come there. But it was good in a way that I could see quite a few women, maybe definitely not in the same numbers. We were always the minority, but there were still so many women of color. That's another diversity that I was seeing there. A lot of women from the African continent I saw there. There were a lot of women from the UK, many young women as well, which is also something that I feel like I see a lot of young women in India, but not so many mid-senior to senior level women. But when it comes to covering big events, you don't see many youngsters who are given the opportunity. So I think these were the main things where I could feel like when I look around, there are women who look like me who are also here. So I don't feel like I'm being cornered, or I don't feel alone, like you said.
And do you remember the moment when it hit you first in India that this is an industry predominantly dominated by men?
I mean, anytime I go for a match coverage, I know that I can see like there are only men around. But I think the one moment where I realized that this is just predominantly covered with men. I remember I was at one of the matches. I think it was one of the ISL matches, and we all have a habit of reaching the matches very early. So I must have reached, say, about 1 or 2 hours before kickoff, and they hand out the team sheets an hour before the kickoff, right? So when I went to ask for it, I didn't get it at first. I think the person in charge didn't know me at that time, which is fine. But when some other man went and asked it, he got it. So that was definitely not a question on familiarity. They were probably questioning what a woman is doing in that press box. And as far as I remember, I was the only woman in the press box. So times like these, you feel weird, right? Because they are not exactly welcoming you. And I also remember vaguely this was at the corporate stadium some 5, 6 years ago for an I League game. So there are different arrangements done for the media and the people who come to watch the match. I see thing there were loos for men and women for both the crowd and also the media. For the media, the loo for the men was open. For women, it was locked. So the first thing that comes up in my mind is you assume there are no women going to be in media. That's the first thing that comes up in my mind. So I think these were one of the few instances where I felt like, yeah, it's still predominantly a male industry.
Have you observed any changes in the time that you've spent in the industry? Have you seen any changes over the years?
I think main changes
Positive changes. I'm hoping positive.
Yeah, I think definitely it's changed in terms of, like I mentioned earlier, there are many young writers, up and coming writers who are coming into the industry, female writers that I meet. A lot of, when I entered, there were not so many. I think there were mostly women like Sharda Ugra, I look up to. These are at very senior level. But right now, I see that more, say, early 20s to mid 20s, there are many women who are entering, which is great. And I also see there's a lot of exposure they get in terms of, or let me say, they are trying to market themselves quite better on social media, which is something that maybe we didn't do earlier. Like, I feel like that's very important. That's something that helped me as well. Like, I used to be very active on Twitter, and that's how you and I also know each other. So these things help in terms of networking and friendships, and I think that's a major change that I'm seeing. These women showcase their work on Twitter, trying to make connections on Twitter, and equally they are also getting recognized by other people uh, at home or abroad. So that's a major change, I guess.
Mansi, you've been in a position where you've seen the industry, every aspect of the industry, right? From athletes to the journalistic world, to the PR world, to, other aspects of the industry. What are the things that you think we can incorporate to make sure that, the industry itself becomes more gender neutral? There's more involvement of women in every area of the industry, not just from the athletes' perspective.
Right. I think there are still a good number of women who work in sports media, but you would see mostly in the PR roles. I think in general, if you see, there are more women in PR roles because they want to put forward a woman's face when it comes to making relations in media. I don't know how to put it. But in other terms, I think including women in sports, in sports media, particularly if we talk about, say, journalism, is important because I feel that has an impact on the coverage that you do. For example, a man is not going, let's be honest, a man is not going to show as much interest in women's sport as a woman is doing right now, as much as I hate to admit it. So, when you do not have a woman on your editorial panel, that's going to show in your coverage. Your coverage is going to be male dominated or catered to an audience which is only going to read about male sports. The slightest of things, like when we also talk about not just women's sports, topics that affect women, say when we talk about menstruation, or if we talk about sexism, or we talk about any gender issues, then I think, like, if you have a woman on board, that's going to show in your coverage. Because right now, when I see in most places, when there are not women on board, you can see the coverage is, you got come to know coverage is being decided by a man. So there's always going to be that sort of lack of diversity, let's say, in that coverage.
Mansi, a message for all the young girls who are aspiring to be a sports journalist.
I think the best thing that I could say is just keep writing and keep marketing yourself. Right now, I feel like the environment is such that you are going to be accepted, you're going to be welcome. So keep writing and don't give up on your hope. And even on days when you feel like it's not going to work out, remember that there's another woman looking at you and looking at you as an inspiration. So you're always going and inspiring and motivating other people. So keep at it.
Thank you so much, Mansi, for such a beautiful message. Very grateful to you for your time today. Wish you all the best in your future endeavors and speak soon.